Tim Kawahara, Executive Director of the Richard S. Ziman Center for Real Estate. We're an interdisciplinary center here at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. I have the honor of moderating this panel, and it's entitled Building Sustainable Cities, Integrating Green Construction, Smart Technologies, and Sustainable Design. And I'm using paper, which is very not sustainable. My colleague Nareed Katz, I noticed, had her tablet, but I promise I will recycle this afterwards. The built environment ecosystem, which Theo mentioned, consists of both the real estate built environment, but also infrastructure as well. So those carbon numbers are accounting for the entirety of the built environment, of which the vast majority do come from cities. It's also responsible for, as I mentioned, all these gas emissions. Today, the world is also experiencing a rapid growth in urban population globally, with more than half of the 8 billion individuals living in the world living in cities. And by 2050, that's predicted to go up to 70%. So you can see that cities are a really important part of our lives and globally, and it's going to only continue to be so further in the future. So lots to focus on there. To meet the challenge, we must focus on urban planning, land use policies, environmental mitigations, economic drivers, social outcomes, and climate resiliency. We have a great panel of experts with us today who are going to tell us how to do it and do it in 40 minutes or so.
Wow.
Yep. So let me just briefly introduce Melissa Gutierrez-Sullivan, who's the first VP head of ESG at CIM Group, which is now a major global company. Expanded your footprint dramatically. I think started here in Hollywood. Just tell me the...
We are based here, mid-Wilshire. We have about 1,000 employees, and we have assets across the Americas, Central America, South America, Canada, U.S., obviously. We are a very diverse portfolio. We own office, multifamily, mixed use, retail, industrial, hotels, you name it, we own it. We touch it with sustainability. We also have infrastructure platforms. So we own a massive solar farm in Central California, which was not mentioned today by David, but we have a massive solar farm in Central California. We also own renewable natural gas company that invests in pulling methane from landfill and repurposing it. Data centers, which I'm excited to talk about too. We own a data center company as well as individual data centers in North America. So we've got a very diverse portfolio, and then credit too. We also are a lender. And we are vertically integrated. So we're an owner, operator, developer, and lender. We develop our own projects here on the west coast, on the east coast. We also develop using subcontractors, but we do self-perform here. And we have, if you've been to the Sycamore District, that's one of our big developments. We also own The Lot, which is a production company. So just some background on us.
And I can say that almost all large companies like CIM Group today have chief sustainability officers. So this is very much in the forefront of the commercial real estate world, and everybody's thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think literally, there's so many chief development officers.
Yeah, it was around when I started. So I've been there 3 years. So 2022, I think about 10 of my friends all got new jobs as heads of sustainability or heads of ESG, all in that 1 year time frame, being driven mostly by BlackRock at the time and their initiatives to focus on ESG. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is that the institutional capital is sort of requiring that buildings be sustainable these days. Which I think
tenants are demanding it. Yeah. We have a lot of investors. We have U.S. investors, so it's interesting with the new administration how that's going. But we also have a lot of European and Asian investors who are very focused on this, very committed to it, and don't understand what's going on in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're a little behind, I think. Yeah. The rest of the globe.
We weren't.
I just looked up the list of the most sustainable cities and countries, and we're nowhere to be found. So, long ways to catch up. And we also have with us Jack Symington, who's a director of City Climate Innovation with the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator. They have a wonderful facility down in the LA Arts District. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, sure. So Jack Symington, director of City Climate Innovation. LACI is really focused on building an inclusive green economy, especially in Southern California. That's our kind of one sentence tagline. We do it through 3 different ways. We incubate startups, so really kind of pre-seed, seed stage startups that are in renewable energy, zero emission transportation, or material circularity. Those are our 3 focus. we also work with another pillar of ours called enhancing community, which is making sure that communities that have previously not been at the kind of vanguard of deploying these climate tech solutions are kind of reaping the benefits early on. Part of that is workforce development. So we have a very good workforce development program where we kind of hear what our startups are seeing as like needs in the workforce, and then building curriculums around that for really targeted demographics in the LA region. And then the last pillar is one that I'm in, which we call market transformation, which is all about the public and private partnerships. And this, you're not going to change transportation and energy without working with the public sector. We're an incubator. We support private sector companies. But my role is to then kind of connect the dots with various folks in the public sector, city, county, the ports, the California Resources Board, the Energy Commission as well. My background is really in medium and heavy duty electrification. I can know enough to be dangerous about renewable energy and batteries and material circularity, but we've done a lot of work, especially advancing transportation electrification, ports, buses, last mile delivery here in Los Angeles, and we have a whole suite of goals that we want the whole region to hit before the Olympics come in 2028.
There's also a lot of last mile travel for just people transit as well, in addition to trucks and services. And then finally, we have Shana Bonstin, who's Deputy Director, Department of City Planning, which plays a significant role in all of this for the city of LA. Some of you may not know, but Los Angeles County is made up of 88 independent cities, but the city of Los Angeles is by far the largest and the most influential. So a couple of words maybe about your role.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have none assets, by the way, and no money. In the planning department, I guess our power really comes at developing rules and regulations and helping development through process. And so, some of what I'll want to talk about a little bit is that land use connection and how important that is to sustainability. And that's really kind of a bigger picture, kind of city design. But I've been with the planning department for about 24 years. That was not an intention. I actually came from planning grad school, and before that was in environmental studies major at UC Santa Cruz. But my interest, I thought I would like to learn and eventually teach. And I thought maybe I'll give myself 3 years, but it ends up I'm still learning. Although I did teach for the last 3 years also at CSUN. They have a Master's in Sustainability program, so looking at legislation. But within the planning department, we have different kind of sections and divisions. We, as I mentioned, we'll look at project review, so development projects that are coming to us, but then we also do long-range planning. So I oversee one of the bureaus that looks at long-range planning for the whole of the city, but I do it in neighborhood districts. So we also have a bureau that does citywide policy, and there are certain things that make more sense or more judicious to do at a citywide level. Housing policy is one of them. In some ways, sustainability and climate adaptation also is at a citywide level, but a lot of those nuances come in how how our rules interact in the context of neighborhoods and districts. And so that's where some of the long-range planning that is looking at a more neighborhood-based scale is very important. I'm also the Chief Sustainability Officer for the department. That in that role, I get to coordinate with other departments, which is really exciting and kind of a good chance to problem solve based on specific issues. And I think that's where government, I think we'll probably get into some of this idea of like where you innovate with good ideas is by bringing others that think differently. And we have, as government and other industries, really been kind of siloed traditionally. So boxing out of that and being able to problem solve is important.
Yeah, I was just part of a group that's trying to help inform the city on what they might need to do to help with the recoveries. And a lot of it is approval processes and planning, and developers have to go to multiple windows and get lots of different approvals. And so hopefully to expedite recovery, we'll streamline some of that and maybe have one-stop shops even. But I think, for the first time, the city's going to have to really coordinate all of these efforts across different departments and such. So Santa Cruz, I didn't know you were, do you save the banana slug up there?
Absolutely. Yes, I should have brought my sweatshirt.
That's great. So why don't we just get in sort of the meat of it? And, I've been part of green building conferences for probably the past 15 years, and it was pretty novel back then, but it's become, increasingly more sophisticated, more technologies have come in. And so I'll turn to Melissa first and talk about some of the exciting things that are happening and what's kind of the newest and greatest in green building. And of course, you're focused on issues related to energy management and water management and managing efficient buildings and advancing net zero. And so in terms of a big portfolio that you're managing and all these different tools and technologies at your disposal, what are you doing?
As mentioned, that we have multiple funds, multiple types of assets. So for me, one of the first things, I've been at CIM now for 3 years. So one of the first initiatives we had was onboarding a tool that could help us track our data. So, and when I say data, I just mean energy bills, water bills, waste bills. So we have onboarded, I don't want to say names. I want to be careful about names that we're using, but we are using a tool. If you want to talk to me after, I'm happy to share with you the name.
Suffice it to say, data analytics.
Data analytics tool. There are some great ones also coming out of Europe right now, which I'm seeing. Happy to share those names with you too. But looking at AI, taking resiliency into connection with that energy consumption, with the water consumption, and how that's going to help related to climate change. So there's amazing tools out there just about collecting the data. Because we're also an infrastructure company, I'm also excited about some of the companies that we're investing in. So, and this is public, so I can talk about it. We invested in a company called Bedrock, which is a geothermal company. We did a pilot project at one of our assets in Austin recently. The benefit is that you don't have to drill down as deep with most geothermal companies. So we're seeing that. We implemented that, I believe, spring of last year. So we're getting the data. We're seeing good numbers there. So we're excited about that. On the infrastructure side too, we're also looking at prefab. We're looking at investing. When I say infrastructure, I should clarify that. We're kind of like a venture capital firm in the way that we invest in startup technologies. We have a decarbonization strategy that we're kicking off. So we're looking at things like prefab, we're looking at carbon capture, at cement, at concrete, and just investing in these companies to bring them more to scale. Because we have so many development projects across the country, we can pilot these projects at our own projects, at our own development sites, and really benefit both ourselves from reducing emissions as well as these companies that we're investing in. So those are the kind of technologies. I'm excited about AI. We haven't done a ton of AI yet, but we know it's coming, and we're constantly watching videos or demos to make sure that we're on top of that. I tried to plug into ChatGPT. Could you run a net zero analysis for us and just see what it even said? But there's so much data that we have to get and just learn how to plug that in and really use it to help adapt our net zero program. We are net zero. We committed to net zero by 2050. So it's something that we are on top of right now. We have 50% reduction target by 2030 for scopes 1 and 2. So we're very focused on that in this moment.
Maybe 2 seconds on what net zero means in the built environment.
Yeah, so for us, it's reducing all of our emissions by 2050. That includes embodied carbon. That includes what is called scope 3 emissions. So our embodied carbon will probably be a majority. It's about 80 to 90% of our emissions are most likely coming from the materials that we use to develop our buildings. So that will be interesting too, as we go into this, looking at resilience related to wildfire. What is the embodied carbon in those materials that are going to help us build more resilient? And it's also looking at our infrastructure, our portfolio companies that we invest in. What is their carbon footprint? And then at our buildings, obviously, how are we managing them? Are we, LED is like low-hanging fruit, but what other things? Are we looking at cool roofs, which we have cool roofs? Are we looking at other ways, windows systems, HVAC? Just investing in any technologies that we can to help make them more efficient. Our business model traditionally is buying existing buildings and making them more efficient. So that's very in line with what I do, which is great. And also going back to your point about integrating with different departments, I work with our property management team very closely. I work with our development team very closely. Our investments team, it's integrated from the time we start investing in an asset to the end of life. And so all of that is just kind of the way that we're looking at net zero. And we're in it. We're reporting. We reported last year for the first time to ULI and Greenprint, and we'll be reporting again this year. So it's exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And I again, going back to the word, the elephant in the room is this wildfire recovery.
Yeah,
And we do, in terms of infrastructure, we do have a chance to sort of rebuild better.
Yeah,
so in the Palisades, for example, they still had clay pipes, and we probably need to bury the power lines. Yeah. And this is sort of a once in a generational chance to actually get at least the infrastructure more sustainable.
Yeah, that's right. And I sit on the board of U.S. Green Building Council California. And we are doing, the team there is doing, it's not me, they're doing amazing work. You guys should look into them. They're working with all of the leaders. If you want to get involved, going back to what Nurit was talking about earlier with getting involved, amazing organization, green job postings, but also doing a lot of work around resiliency and working with the city and other leaders throughout the state to help.
And all up and down the supply chain, there's been a number of innovations in materials, as you mentioned, in particular concrete, which apparently is an incredibly huge emitter of carbon. Mm-hmm. So there's been all sorts of innovative practices to try to create better concrete.
Yep, that's what we're looking at. Yep.
So you mentioned your USGBC. USGBC is called the U.S. Green Buildings Council, very much on the lead on all of this. Most of you have probably heard of LEED certifications, where it's offered through USGBC, and there are different ratings for different buildings. There's like LEED bronze, LEED silver, LEED platinum, and the more sustainability technology you put in the building, the better. So I want to just talk about the USGBC's work and the certifications?
Yeah. So it's a California-wide organization. We used to be USGBC California or Los Angeles. Now we're California, and we have job training initiatives, education initiatives. We've been training on wildfires and talking about wildfires since 2018. So this goes back. We have experts within each different type of industry on the board, as well as as members. We host an annual green conference. If you're interested, it's going to be in San Francisco this year in May. But it's we're doing a lot of education around green buildings, and yes, LEED certification for those who don't know that too.
Yeah, and I guess a big question has been, early on, I think a lot of folks were doing green building because it was sort of like the right thing to do. But I think now there's really a return on investment in investing in some of these things too. So how does your company view that?
Yeah, a big part of my job is making sure that we have a business case. Because we're a private equity firm and we have institutional investors, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors. We can't just be, unfortunately can't go put solar on every single rooftop if it doesn't pencil out. So it's everything that we do has to have a business case. There has to be a reason. I can't just put in, any sort of technology. There has to be a good business case for it. And so that's what we've been focused on the past year. And now moving forward, it's a big focus of ours.
Yeah, I think that's what has been the real game changer.
Yeah, and we see it. And we also, our founders have said they believe in this. When we're getting backlash from the administration, various things going on internally, they've said, we are committed. This is something that's important and it's the right thing to do. And so we are committed, but we still need to have that business case, and we have that, so it's great.
And we won't go too deep into it, but the change of administration could have some significant impacts on what's going on here.
Yep.
So why don't we just turn to Jack real briefly, and we talk a lot about, in the real estate world, public-private partnerships. So, how can the public sector and private sector work together to push some of the sustainability goals here in Los Angeles and beyond?
Yeah, one thing that the cities that we see have a lot of control over is, they procure a lot of goods and they, have a lot of influence on kind of what goes in. But we also see that the private sector is really frustrated at times with like city procurement processes. Like
at times?
I think there's some city people here maybe.
Yeah.
And so an initiative that we've started actually at LACI, or joined in on. There's a few other people doing it elsewhere, but this kind of challenge-based procurement, where instead of an RFP saying like we need this material at this grade and being very prescriptive in what the city wants, come out with like an RFP that's more of a challenge. Like, here's our problem that we have. Here are some city assets that you could use and like departments that you would be working with to make this happen. Here are standards we need to meet when it comes to sustainability and net zero, et cetera. Pitch us a solution. And so I think that opens the door for a lot more interest from the private sector. You're going to get like not only higher quality applications because, they know that they don't need to meet like the letter of every, dot in the RFP, but you're going to have more innovative solutions too. And so, we've been doing that when it comes to goods movement in cities. We were working actually with 6 cities across the country to implement some sort of zero emissions freight solution that meets their needs. But we came at it with a very open question about like, here's a problem. Let's scour the universe of companies that are out there or services that are out there. And then LACI played that role of intermediary between the city and the private sector to do that matchmaking and do a little bit of fundraising for the pilot implementation there. And so there's certainly a role for entities like LACI or even like US Green Building Council to kind of be that go-between between the private and public sector, trusted by both. So I think that's one of the big ones. And I think the second smaller one, and it kind of might tie into the federal side of things too, but really get on the same page when it comes to communication about like what the benefits are, like why are we doing this? A lot of people will see, oh, it could raise costs. Well, not in some circumstances. You want to avoid nuance, I guess, in like public discourse. But a lot of what we talk about is, these are quality of life investments that we want to be making and decisions that we're making. This is not necessarily like a climate thing. This is, we want to improve congestion in cities. We want to improve air quality in cities. So we're kind of aligning on the communications. This is like maybe a less thought after public and private partnership.
Yeah, I know you do a lot with transportation and things too. I mean, obviously we have the Port of Los Angeles, one of the largest ports in the world, and LAX is continuing to expand. So lots of goods and services coming through Los Angeles. So transportation and how to get those goods out, critically important. We're going to have hopefully an electric fleet of trucks coming. Where are we with that?
Yeah. So actually,
driverless too.
We'll see about that when it comes to the ports.
But we have unions there.
Yeah.
The electrification is going, and it's going pretty quickly. Quicker than you might think based on some of the headlines. LACI actually, I organized a infrastructure planning CEC grant, thank you, Commissioner Hochschild, to look at where charging infrastructure needs to go for trucks in the 710 corridor around LA County. How much are going to be needed by 2028 to hit our goal of 40%, and then the 2035 kind of mandate of 100%. And there's a public and private partnership there too. The Port of LA and Long Beach have property that is not really of good use for anything. They've allocated it to charging infrastructure providers. We received some funding from LA Metro and the MSRC, which is part of the South Coast Air Quality Management District, to deploy charging infrastructure in partnership with a private sector company on Port of LA property. And so, they're going to be getting good rent from this company on land that was otherwise completely unused. Port of Long Beach has one of these relationships with a company where actually Port of Long Beach is capturing upside on utilization of these chargers. So above a certain, megawatt hours dispensed per month, Port of Long Beach is getting additional money. And so there are these kind of win-wins that you can find when it comes to transportation electrification, which is a big land use question in a lot of ways.
For sure. Yeah, I just met last month with the folks called Cul-de-sac, which are outside of Tempe. They built an entire community that is carless. And so, but they have relationships with light rail, and Waymo is going to be, and they put all the amenities obviously with the project too. So very experimental, but maybe urban planning, and Shana could tell us about some of those things in a little bit. But also Jack, what about things like clean technologies and introduction of microgrids, which are sort of energy hubs which are independent of the grid, and some of the solutions there to enhance resilience, at least in the urban infrastructure?
Yeah, I think for those who are here when Commissioner Hochschild was here, batteries are getting really cheap and electrons are getting really cheap. And so it really behooves us to figure out how to get our energy system as distributed as possible. I have a colleague, Maite Sanchez, who works kind of a lot on the energy side of things, and they're thinking about community solar has taken off in some places. PUC kind of quibbling not aside, but what about community batteries, right? Like if a distribution circuit goes down or a transmission circuit goes down, can we have localized hubs of batteries that can provide a few megawatts for a few hours? I think batteries integrated into homes and into charging infrastructure, especially to reduce strain on the grid, flatten that peak. all of that is going to just lessen the burden on kind of the utility side of things, which will make resiliency just easier by itself.
Yeah, I've also met with some folks that are commercial real estate landlords, and they're looking at maybe obsolete space that's not usable in their buildings and putting battery storage in there too. Batteries run hot, and maybe you'll talk about data centers. They run very hot too, a lot of water, and so there's energy. It's both sides of the coins there.
Yeah, I mean, there are battery chemistries out there that are very well suited for for stationary storage. Yeah. Their thermal kind of runaway threats are almost none in some cases, and so if you have that, especially like in a climate-controlled room, you're going to be pretty good.
Yeah. Any other innovative programs at LACI that you guys are working on?
Yeah, I'll kind of mention a few of our startups here. We're at UCLA and recognizing a lot of the work that the late great Professor Shoup did. We have a lot of companies that are kind of focused on this urban mobility question. One is Automotus, which kind of does cameras for curbside management, so you can really kind of automatically ticket or kind of bill loading zones and parking spaces. They have projects across the country right now, started by an LMU graduate. Another one would be a company of ours called Stack Mobility, which if you're familiar with New York and we're thinking of land use, kind of the vertical parking garages, they've built a way to integrate charging into those. And so really a lot of these companies at the cross section of like land use and transportation electrification and trying to kind of make the best out of both.
Yeah, parking in the future could be completely automated, so there will be a energy piece there too. And you mentioned Professor Donald Shoup. We just lost him a couple weeks ago. I will say that he was a dear friend, such a fantastic urban planner, such a great thinker. He was probably the foremost expert in parking in the world, and so I'll dedicate at least my mentorship or my moderating here to Professor Shoup, who was he had a following called. He had a huge following, and they were all called Shoupistas, as you guys. He even had a website, and what he called himself, like Shoup Dog, I think was his.
That's awesome.
So why don't we turn to Shana? An important part of all of this is urban planning and zoning and all the things that go in with land use, and of course you're thinking at the very high level about all this. The city of LA is going through, I think, 34 community plan updates, which they're doing. I think you've been most recently working on or very knowledgeable with the downtown LA. But I guess sort of how does land use and zoning and planning, and how do you think about this at the city in terms of promoting sustainable built environment here in Los Angeles?
Yeah, and I'll bring a moment up about Professor Shoup too. But I think, again, speaking of generalized land use, so let me just start with the city of LA. You mentioned 88 different cities within the county. The city of LA is 469 square miles. It is really big. Yeah. It is very diverse, which is part of why after 24 years, I'm still learning, but I think how we can kind of systematically look at land uses is, we've talked about kind of concentrating development along transit lines, along the existing infrastructure. That's easier said than done because existing infrastructure also has existing communities, and we are concerned about displacement. But something that has aligned very nicely is the new zoning code and the downtown community plan. So you mentioned 34. We actually had 35, but we combined two together. And the downtown community plan, so a little bit about general plan. I won't get into too much, I don't even know. Our parents don't even know what urban planners do, so I don't want to, I was going to ask, who knows what an urban planner is? But we do set out goals and plans, and that is part of why we are very slow. And when I think of innovation, it's hard, we don't operate very quickly, but part of it is that we're doing a lot of groundwork based on data, based on research to kind of understand what are existing conditions and what do we want for the future. So LA 2040 is what it's called, by the way, because we're anticipating what growth would look like in another 15 to 20 years. So the general plans are what we do to kind of have larger concepts, and then we do ordinances and other rules that are based on kind of supporting those concepts that are laid out. So the general plan for the city of Los Angeles, there's many different components. A lot of them intersect with sustainability. We have an environmental justice chapter of our general plan that we're working on, open space, a variety of things tied to climate resiliency, hazard mitigation. But the land use plan, we divide into 35 different areas, and we focused on downtown. It was in sore need of an update. Many of our community plans have not been updated in decades. And so I think it's been about a 12-year process, but we just got approved. We're in effect, and it has new zoning. And so what I'm kind of bringing to point on this is with the new zoning and the new community plan, we're actually able to put so much more density and housing capacity within the downtown area. And so that lends itself to a very important message about sustainability and, again, being able to place the density where it is needed most and also where it has ability to grow. So downtown with existing commercial and industrial uses does not displace residents when you're adding more units. So just for a little bit of context, so in the downtown area, we're expecting about 100,000 additional units as part of the zoning and capacity. I think it's 175,000 folks and then 100,000 new businesses as well. So then that's full capacity. The other thing that I'll say is that we don't have the ability to actually ensure that any of this happens. We set up the rules, right? And we try to make it as appealing with incentives, but it is entirely up to private markets to then take advantage of that. So the reference actually, in the downtown area, we removed parking requirements. Mm-hmm. So there are no parking minimums.
A lot of that has to do with the public transit infrastructure too that's been implemented there.
Exactly. So, and as a result of that, what we're hoping is, of course, there's increased units being produced. Like essentially the money that would have been spent on parking can be utilized for additional buildings and a kind of sensible land use. But that is a harder sell in other parts of the city. Absolutely.
Yeah, downtown's also a little bit in transition these days too, post-pandemic. And I think there's any of those buildings are maybe 35% occupied in any given day with workers, and so a lot of the retail and things have left too. So downtown is very much in transition.
And in ways, it's very fortuitous that that's our first community plan that has the new zoning code too. So we could actuate like kind of a significant amount of change and be able to again kind of focus our development. That's actually 1% of the city of the square footage of the city, but we're anticipating 20% of the growth to be there. About 80% of it is within a half mile of transit. So again, being able to really kind of focus future development capacity.
Of course, we desperately need housing in the city of Los Angeles too. And I know housing units production is a big deal for downtown LA too. But we also have these NIMBYs in Los Angeles. And there's I think the city still zones 70% single family homes, and we just plan was initiated to approve to do more housing, but it sort of does not touch the single family. But would it be true to say that at least in downtown, you get less NIMBYism because people sort of expect density?
I will say, I don't know if I phrase it as less NIMBYism, but there was definitely more of a consensus and acceptance of incredible increased density and development in that area. And because, as you were mentioning, kind of it's needed, the invigoration would be appreciated. And there are so many vacant parking lots and existing buildings that are underutilized. And again, it's not displacing existing residents. Mm-hmm. So that's been really key.
Yeah, there's a lot of social equity issues and things here that are embedded in all of this as well too. So why don't we just switch quickly to sort of the resiliency topic. And again, the elephant in the room are the wildfires. And as a city planner, how do you think about mitigating fires? I mean, is it more defensible land that you're going to, require, or we have this thing called the wild land urban interface, which 1 in 3 Californians live in the WUI, and so they're going to be very vulnerable in the future. And we have a lot of these questions even now about should we build the same thing in the same place, because it's probably going to burn down again, and unless we harden and fix our infrastructure to be more resistant against these natural disasters in the future, it's going to happen again. So how do you look at that from a land use zoning standpoint?
That is a great question, and I will say there will be still a lot of time to develop that. What is interesting to me, like if you had asked, as the city planner who oversees neighborhoods, including the Palisades, what might your role be, the first month in after a disaster? Well, it ends up your role is to take notes and kind of figure out what's happening. And that's going to be a long time. Part of it because the space of problem solvers there's a lot of folks filling that. But there's also, I was kind of thinking about, there's an adage like the best time to have planted a tree was 20 years ago, right? The best time to have had resilience plans. This is like 40 years ago. We're in the process of developing a lot of things that sort of trajectory informs us, but they're not on the ground now as rules. I was also thinking about the timing, right? So like a lot of even the climate vulnerability assessment that we've been working on, which is looking at environmental but also social vulnerabilities with a real focus on vulnerable communities and what that looks like for long-term climate change in terms of hazard, disasters that might happen, but also long-term health benefits. So that hasn't even been released yet. That's about to be released, but the amount of work that it takes to get the plans kind of going to at least know what our baseline is. Not to mention, once you get a plan out there, you then develop more specific policies and programs based on that. So the role is complex, and there's no answers or solutions just yet.
Yeah.
And I would say on a broader basis, we do emphasize, as I mentioned with downtown, increased density and kind of growth not occurring in the WUI. We're seeing growth that we'd like to focus in existing infrastructure in the heart of the city. But those are
100 years ago, we planted palm trees in Los Angeles, which are not indigenous to Los Angeles. They were brought here by developers to make it look sort of like a exotic place. And turns out they have They take a lot of water. They bear no fruit, and they provide no shade anywhere. So,
well, apparently they were also brought in for the Olympics.
They were in 32 Olympics. We'll be the first city, I think, to host 3, except other than Athens.
You didn't mention the rats.
Yeah, well, it's kind of an unpleasant topic.
I want to know about the rats later.
Rats love palm trees. Sometimes they come running when they're on fire.
Exactly. That's why you see them out about. Before we get to questions, let me just ask one question. If you could be really quick, Melissa, but
Sure.
We talked a little bit about retrofitting. So the vast majority of the built environment in Los Angeles is not new construction. So what can we do to sort of electrify and go back and do some of the retrofitting existing real estate?
Yeah, it's something with net zero commitment that we are aware of. I'm very focused right now on efficiency. The electrification of a building is very complex and very expensive. Mm-hmm. And so once again, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors. So we have not electrified a building yet. We've converted an office space to multifamily, which I thought was pretty cool, but we have not taken out gas and plugged in all electricity. I am focused on, as we get closer to 2030, obviously our new builds, specifically here in California and LA, are very efficient, but making sure that as we build and look at design type throughout the country and elsewhere, not in a state like California, that we are looking at electric appliances and making sure that the energy that we're consuming is as green as possible. Mm-hmm. Data centers has been a big challenge for us because the reality is like a lot of these data centers are in the Southwest. You have utility companies that can't provide energy to the scale that the data centers need. And these regions and like Rocky Mountain Power, they have their own targets related to renewable energy. I don't think that they're going to meet those targets because with the amount of data centers that are going up, the speed that they're going up, the speed that they're needed, there's no way they can't even provide the energy now. So how are they going to go to green and all of that? So for me, that's a big focus of mine. They're not all electric, those data centers, but that's what I mean. I'm looking at it at scale, and it's challenging. But short answer is, we're not electrifying yet, but we will, and we're heading in that direction with new builds specifically.
Yeah, one of the questions here is directed to you: is CIM Group investing in hydrogen hubs in California?
We have not yet, but that's not to say it's not on the table or that we haven't looked at it.
Got it. Okay. And question for Shana. Gaining municipal planning department approval for new technology is often a key roadblock for adoption. How can we improve planning acceptance with new technology?
Oh, I love that question because I can kind of blame building and safety a little bit. But I mean, I think,
it's Osama's problem.
Don't see this. In talking about kind of the innovations of materials, like in a way, the role of planning needs to get out of the way of some of the innovations and make sure that we also create an environment in which the creativity of either design or the private industry is allowed to solve for kind of problems. You had mentioned this idea of like a standard, like you're going towards a goal. In the context of something different, it was like RFPs, right? But it made me think there's a change that we have in the new zoning code to enable something called alternative compliance. And it's kind of going back to this idea of like we all are different experts in different ways. And I think where planning and the city has been problematic sometimes when we are trying to control or solve for a problem of the day that then becomes an additive or complex additional rule. But I do think that with building materials in particular, there is much to be done in terms of a faster kind of turnaround and analysis. There used to be a group, I think, within the city that was able to look at proposals for innovative materials. And, that's something that could be revisited. But again, enabling the meeting of a broader goal and different ways in which that can be accomplished, I think would be important.
Great. There was also a question about the cost of affordable housing being $750,000. Our controller did do an audit and found that it costs up to, that is for a particular type of product called permanent supportive housing, which has wraparound social services. And there are many people trying to work on how to get that cost down. A lot of it is baked into things like the requirement to use prevailing wage and labor and some other higher levels of construction standards and green building. There are a lot of private capital folks that are looking at how to drive that down, and we know some folks that are doing units for $300,000 now per door, and so there is some progress on doing that. But the typical low-income housing tax credit, permanent supportive housing projects are still costing in the neighborhood of $750,000, which is like you can go buy a brand new 5-bedroom home in Arizona for $750,000, and that's what it costs us to build one, for a formerly homeless person here in Los Angeles. So. It's definitely...
And there's so many factors that are adding to that.
Sure.
But I will say, too, with planning, I think we're trying, with our new zoning code, to be so much more intentional about the things that we're asking for. And again, that was sort of innovative to like redo your zoning code. By the way, not everyone does that. Our zoning code had been basically in place since 1946. But the undertaking of kind of moving over something it's been additive, like rules are additive every single year. We're solving for something else, and that gets more and more complex. But to be able to kind of put it aside and start fresh about rebuilding the code based on what do you want to see. And I guess what I'm getting at is the streamlining of process can very much incentivize what you see developed. Because the process that we have, and again, it can range from a simple clearance, I say simple, people might, a simpler clearance to something that would require conditional use permits or design review board approval. But at the longer times or years that it's taking to go through an approval process, of course, is a lot of time and money. And so to be able to kind of right size the types of developments that we want to see, in which, like affordable housing, for example, really streamlining that process so that you're likely to see more production.
Great. Question for Jack. This is from Dan Roberts. You mentioned experience in the MDHD electrification. Can you comment on pullback by CARB on advanced clean fleets?
Yeah, so I would say it's not so much a pullback from CARB as it was they saw the writing on the wall with the new administration. But all that's to say, California still has a lot of levers to pull. The ports themselves have levers to pull to force only ZE trucks to come into their facility. Now, there are concerns about how you're going to drive up costs and drive business away from these ports into Seattle or Houston. I think if you look at cargo volumes at the Port of LA and Long Beach over the last 5 years, or last 20 years, when there's been a lot of environmental regulations, the market share hasn't changed that much. LA Long Beach is just really too attractive of a port. So there is levers that they can pull. There's a clean truck fee in place already, $10 per TEU. I've seen research that says that could go all the way up to $70 per TEU and divert 0.5% of cargo. So that's a lever to pull. The South Coast AQMD, they have their indirect source rule for warehouses, which is only going to further drive electrification for the trucks that visit those warehouses. And if you're visiting the warehouse, you're going to have the same truck visit the port. So that's going to drive electrification. And then the last kind of peg to that three-peg stool is a lot of the Fortune 100s and 500s are worried about their Scope 3 emissions. And drayage of Walmart, Home Depot, IKEA, you name it, in and out of Amazon, in and out of the ports. It is kind of a low-hanging fruit in some senses to just like get those emissions out of their supply chain. And so they're going to be, I've spoken with these, we call them beneficial cargo owners, who are baking zero emission requirements into like their contracts with the third-party drayage companies that pull containers in and out of the port. So there are a lot that California can still do to advance medium heavy duty electrification, especially when it comes to like the more heavy duty side.
Great, thank you. Probably have maybe time for one or two more questions. This one's for Melissa. How do you consider the availability of green or conventional power and grid infrastructure when evaluating new projects or investments?
Not at the, it's not going to deter us. Once again, we build a lot in California, so those projects we're not worried about. With the data centers, working with Rocky Mountain Power was something we were focused on. No, at the end of the day, that we're just focused on mainly like the business aspect of it and not really like where the power is coming from. We are, I'm not focused, I'm not a big REX, like we need to go buy REX right now. That's not my goal. My goal is to really make these buildings as efficient as possible. And we do feel that, well, if the utility companies across the country can meet their targets, that will contribute about 30% of our emissions reductions by 2030. So we're kind of leaning on them and hoping that they can, although depending on which region, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But no, it's not deciding.
And what is the premium on building, say, LEED certified?
I mean, I think now if you're doing LEEDs, I mean, California is like basically LEED silver. So, there's no real premium on it. I've heard 2% in other regions, but I think it's pretty flat now.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting the sign that we are out of time. I mean, this subject matter is something that we really could spend like weeks on. But thank you, panel, for your insights.
Thank you.